Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first session in our Campaign of Consciousness series. Tonight's conversation, this is the first in a series, and this is really meant to be a 9-week investigative process, essentially. And some of you had taken me up on my offer to schedule individual one-on-one sessions. And some of you haven't, and that's perfectly fine and okay as well. If you decide at some point you'd like to go ahead and schedule some time together, please feel free to do so. Everything's in the emails that was sent out. If you didn't get one of those, then just reach out and let me know. Tonight's focus is really on tilting in the direction of awakening. And I want to first spend a little bit of time talking about what that term means in the context that I'm using it. Because this term, this word awakening, a spiritual awakening or spiritual enlightenment or self-realization or liberation or any of the words that we might use, they all have a variety of meanings depending upon the context that we're discussing. And in this particular context, what we're talking about is a fundamental shift in conscious perception that is deeply psychological, heart-centered, and wisdom-based. I don't talk about spiritual awakening in terms of getting anything or acquiring anything or trying to have some sort of particular spiritual experience or spiritual insight or spiritual revelation. Those things may occur as one engages in this process of inner exploration. But that's really just sort of a step, if you will, a step on the path towards what true awakening or true enlightenment really is. I also won't be spending a lot of time talking about things like energy and crystals and any of those types of things either. My focus is very much on understanding who it is that we truly are as consciousness, as awareness, as presence, as being. And I'm trying to share this understanding through the use of psychology, through the use of science, things that people can go and investigate for themselves. Because ultimately, this is a very experiential, a very direct and experiential process. And as we go through this series, those of you who stick it out and stay along for the ride, you'll find that there's a central theme that I'm always trying to point towards, and it's this theme of mystery, a theme of not knowing, and of not needing to know. And so much of what the mind is always trying to do is trying to understand, trying to control. And a lot of what we're going to be working through is relinquishing the demands of the mind for knowledge, for answers, for control. We're going to talk a lot about things like surrender and allowing and being present with what is. Some of what I'm going to share might be very challenging in a lot of ways. And as we dig in a little bit this evening, some of that will become more apparent. But most of us have lived our lives from the position of the mind, our entire lives. And as we begin to examine what it is that the mind is constructed out of, as we begin to examine how much truth there is to the nature of mind and to its sort of foundations, or rather how untrue so much of it really is, we may feel that we're being confronted, right? That are the things that we hold most dear, the ways that we think about the world, the beliefs, the notions, the models, the referential systems that we're used to using, may not necessarily have the same meaning anymore. And that can be very difficult and destabilizing and create disillusion. And it's not at all uncommon for people who are going through the kind of spiritual awakening that we're going to be talking about. And I will give you just sort of a highlight of why this is. So I want to talk a little bit about, over the course of maybe about the last 30 years or so, there have been a number of developments in psychology, and there has been a great deal of emphasis placed on language, the sort of framing of our conceptual reality. And what you'll find is that in many of the psychological theories that have been introduced over the course of the last 20 or 30 years, there is a great deal of emphasis on the role that language plays. And there's also a lot of emphasis in several of these psychological theories around how to diffuse language, how to see beyond language, how to recognize the limitations that are inherent in language, and how to move beyond it in a way that creates a greater degree of understanding, a greater degree of recognition. It's sort of like, it's been scientifically proven that there are many different ways of engaging and perceiving and seeing the world. And one of those ways is through the lens of language. And yet, most of us, that's the only lens with which we are familiar. We may have some sort of intuitive sense of ourselves or intuitive sense of life, a gut feeling, if you will, that we may rely on from time to time. But for the most part, even that is being processed through the lens of language. We might have a feeling and we sit here and we say to ourselves, oh, I don't like how this feels. I don't think this is right. And that whole mechanism is being processed through language. We might then respond through the means of language by saying, what is wrong with this situation? What is wrong with this person? Oh, I don't like how they're looking at me. Oh, I don't like the sense of energy I'm getting off of them, whatever it might be. But we're processing even the intuitive sense of ourselves through the lens of language. So if we look at things like, for instance, acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a really wonderful evidence-based therapy that's used in organizations like the Department of Veterans Affairs and other places where there's a lot of emphasis being placed on results. And one of the central themes in ACT is that we are clouded over by language, by our dependency on language, by seeing everything through the lens of words and concepts and ideas. And if we've never been challenged in a way or never been exposed to an alternative, then it may feel a little strange or a little uncomfortable or a little weird to even begin to have a conversation about language and about how entangled and enmeshed we are in our conditioned systems of language and symbols and meaning. One common thing that you can look at right now in your own direct experience, right? You can look at the way that your mind is operating just very much in this moment. You can look at, whatever thought might be crossing your mind. You can sit here and think to yourself, oh, I don't have any thoughts right now. Or you can think to yourself, I don't like this conversation. Or you can think to yourself, why isn't my computer behaving? Whatever it might be. Right? The important factor here, and we're going to talk a lot about this over the course of the next few weeks, the most important factor here is you're aware of that thought. And since you're aware of that thought, that means that you yourself are not the thought. It means that there's an awareness of thinking that is present. The very fact that you can observe a thought means that there's some sort of, we could say, at least for now, we could say there's a distance between who you are and the presence or the appearance of thinking. And so this is a diffusion of language that leads us to a place where we're not necessarily so deeply identified with how we use language to interpret our perceptual experience, to live our lives, to engage in our own internal experience or engage in our experience of the world. So we're changing lenses, so to speak. And one of the things that I like to use as an example quite often is I'll say, you know, here we are, you're sitting in a chair. Yeah? And so we have this object called chair. And we all know that when we see this object called chair, we know exactly what it's for. When you see the object called chair, you know that it's for sitting. And yet, can't we sit in front of a chair and use it as a table? Can't we stand on a chair and use it as a ladder? Could we throw a chair up into the air and make a small child laugh? Could we use a chair to tame a lion? Could we put one chair on top of another and call it art? What happens if we melt the chair down entirely? What was the chair 1,000 years ago, and what will the chair be 1,000 years from now? Is it still just a chair? Or is it infinite potentiality that has been limited by language into the object called chair, for which there is only one purpose: to sit? And it seems like such a simple thing when we think about it in those terms. It can be mind-blowing at one level, but it's like, oh yeah, okay, I get it, a chair, yeah. It's more than what we think of when we think of a chair. Yeah, okay, yeah, you're right, it can do all kinds of wonderful things. But if you take that very same mechanic of limiting thought and how thoughts can limit an object, how our perception limits objects, and then you apply that to yourself, to your own experience of your own being, to your internal dialogue about who it is that you think you are, it becomes a very different kind of process of examination. Are you really the limited mind-body experience that you have been led to believe that you are? Or is there something much deeper, something much less definable, something not bound by language? So that's when we're talking about awakening, when we're talking about enlightenment, one of the most basic things that we have to do is examine how it is that we see language, how it is that we use language, and how it is that we are limited by language. And then we have to say, well, then what are my options? What else can I do? And that's really what we're going to be talking about throughout this process over the course of the next 8 or 9 weeks. Because when we sit here and we have this conversation about this thing called awakening, or we have this conversation about this thing called enlightenment, and I sit here and I say, wow, you know, these words, they don't necessarily mean what we think they mean. They don't necessarily have the solidity or the concreteness that we give them. All words are illusory. All words are essentially made up. They came out of nowhere. And we all agreed to use them when we point at certain things for the sake of communication. So does awakening actually mean anything? Does enlightenment actually mean anything? And what does that mean to me as a person who has been on a spiritual journey all this time, who's trying to awaken, or trying to become enlightened, or trying to find peace, or joy, or happiness, or whatever it is that we're trying to express through language? whatever it is that we're trying to gain or acquire. So absolutely essential. It's sort of the cornerstone of the whole thing. Many times you'll hear gurus and teachers and sages and whatnot, and they'll talk about silence and the mind becoming completely silent. And that's beautiful, if and when and how that may occur for some of us. But what's more important is the recognition of silence, not its continuous state, not achieving a continuous state of something called silence, but rather recognizing that in the absence of words, in the absence of language, what we are left with is silence. What we are left with is quietude. What we are left with is not knowing. So one of the reasons I bring this up, this conversation about language and understanding silence, is because when we get into the conversation about traps in a few weeks, it's sort of towards the very end, we're going to be talking about the nature of the spiritual journey itself as a trap, because it's something that we're defining in language. It's something that we're defining through the use of words. It's some future moment or some future state that's out there somewhere that I'll get one day eventually if I work hard enough, if I practice the right techniques, if I learn the right mantra, whatever it might be. Then I'll get it. Then I'll wake up. Then I'll have arrived at this thing called awakening or enlightenment. And that right there keeps us from just being here. In the beginning, I was talking about how spiritual awakening, I'm talking about this in a very different context than we may be used to hearing it. So many different communities that I've taken part in the past will emphasize things like out-of-body experiences, will emphasize things like, perfect joy that's continuous. They'll talk about, a state of union that never changes. And some of these kinds of things they're interesting, to explore. But ultimately, they're not useful. And I say they're not useful because in the end, we must still live our lives. You cannot escape your human experience no matter how deeply you have seen, no matter the level of insight that you may have had. You cannot escape this body-mind experience that you find yourself participating. And I like to tell people, who are sort of profound meditators, right? You could spend 10 hours sitting on your meditation cushion, and eventually your bladder is full and you have to get up and use the restroom. Yes. And if you don't have the capacity to carry that meditative, contemplative perspective or orientation into the bathroom with you, you're right there in the world. And it's meeting the world. That's where life is lived. Contact with life is made here. Contact with life is made now. And so many of us find ourselves on a spiritual path or on a spiritual journey because we are afraid of life. There's some aspect of pain or suffering or difficulty. Perhaps something happened to us in early childhood or later on in our lives, and we reacted by contracting. We responded by distancing ourselves. And we used that distance or that contraction as a means of protecting ourselves from further hurt and further pain. And the world may not make a whole lot of sense when we live in that place. And so we're looking for a way to leave the world behind. And the promise of enlightenment is a very powerful hook. When you hear certain teachers talk about a state of profound peace that is never perturbed or interrupted. Yeah. I'm reminded of a story. There was a a sage, a guru, a yogi who lived in a cave for 10 years. And he dwelled in this state of absolute perfect peace, perfect harmony. And his visa was getting ready to expire, and he needed to go. It had been 10 years. Let's just say it had been 10 years. And he had to go into the city to renew his visa so he could stay in the country and continue to live in his cave. So here's this very enlightened yogi, no question. So he goes down and he's standing in the office, standing in line, and he gets to the window after standing in line for a while. He gets to the window, and the lady at the window says, "Oh, you need to be in that line over there." And the yogi goes, "Okay." So he goes over to this other line and he stands in that line. And the lady at that window says, "Oh, well, you don't have the right paperwork. You need to go fill out this form. So you have to stand in that line to go get this form." And so he stands in that line for a while. And the man at the front of that line tells him, "Oh, yes, here's the piece of paper, but you also need to go get this." And this went on for a while until the yogi got so fed up that he threw a tantrum. He had a complete meltdown right there in the middle of trying to engage in the world. So protecting ourselves by removing ourselves, that is not awakening, that is not enlightenment, that is not useful. There are people who find themselves on that path, and I think that is beautiful for them. But for most of us, we get up in the morning, we go to work, we come home, we make dinner, we have families that we're interacting with, we may have children that we're responsible for. Some of us may go to school, some of us have hobbies and friends, some of us have demands that are being placed on us from all different angles and perspectives in our lives. And it's not something that we're going to escape. And rather than trying to get away from it through some sort of spiritual means, the kind of non-dual orientation or perspective that I'm sharing here is one that allows us to be fully embodied in life, to recognize and realize what's more true than the words that we use, the concepts, the ideas, the abstractions, to know who it is that we are beyond all of that, and to still live in all of that, and to embody our knowing. So that's a lot of, when we talk about spiritual awakening, I just want to provide sort of a context for what I mean in where I'm going with this conversation. So some of you have had familiarity, listened to non-dual teachings and teachers in the past, and this all sounds like, yep. And perhaps for some of you, maybe it's new. But that's why I want to make sure that I introduce the elements of psychology, because these are things that, they are well researched, well documented. This is not just spiritual mumbo jumbo. This is something that is being investigated in the field of neuroscience. It's being proven out on a regular basis. This is something that gets a tremendous amount of attention in the transpersonal psychological discipline. This is something that's explored through linguistic anthropology. There are many fields of scientific endeavor that are devoted to the study of this phenomena, the phenomena of language, and how our experience of life is altered when we begin to look beyond the filters and the limits of language. So before I go on any further, I just want to ask if anyone has had sort of their own experience, their own a history or a background of non-dual teachings, things that they're familiar with. Is any of what I'm saying resonating, or does it sound like I'm off on a different planet?
This is all brand new to me.
Okay, wonderful.
So scientific or not, it's still mumbo jumbo because it's all brand new to me.
And that's fair.
However, I'm willing to hear more and learn more and educate myself throughout this journey. It sounds quite intriguing. So I'm definitely a beginner, though. Definitely a beginner.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I will just say at this point, though, that we're all beginners in this, right? There's a wonderful phrase within the Zen tradition, beginner's mind, right? To always bring a beginner's mind to each new moment. You know, you can never cross the same river twice, as they say. And so it is brand new, always brand new.
I'd like to say that what really impacted me was when you said that the point of this is not to escape from the world. It's not, so many people turn to religion and spirituality, or even, you know, working out, all kinds of things to try to escape themselves, to try to escape the world that they're in instead of embracing it. So I really like that. That's not what this is about. This isn't about escaping. This is about being more present, enjoying it more.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And what's really interesting is, because of the tendency of mind to see everything through the lens of language, right? It's always very difficult to have conversations about this particular path. As a matter of fact, it's often referred to as the pathless path. And it is riddled with paradox. As a matter of fact, the Saint Sri Ramana Maharshi was well known for saying that the measure of spiritual maturity is based on one's ability to handle ambiguity and paradox. Paradox appears when we have a fixed positionality of mind, and we start to see things can only be this way, they can only be this way, they can only be this way. So there's a degree of inflexibility within the mental structures of the mind for many of us. And the more and more we become exposed to the possibility that we're not limited by language in the way that we think we are, then we're able to hold multiple varying perspectives all at the same time, which is a really wonderful, again, psychological concept, the ability to hold multiple perspectives. It's a very powerful ability, and it allows us to have conversations from a myriad of different positions and to recognize that they're all equally true and all equally correct. There's a meme that I see floating around on Facebook from time to time. It's that picture where you have the number 6 or the number 9, and there are two people, one on each side of it, and one person says it's a 6 and the other person says it's a 9. And then they argue with each other about who's right. There's a story as well that comes out of Buddhism. There was a king, and he gathered together this group of blind men from his kingdom, and he put before them an elephant. And he asked them, in turn, tell me what an elephant is. And of course, the blind man who touched the tusks said it was one thing. The blind man who touched its tail said it was another. A blind man who touched its legs said it was another thing. And then the blind men began to war amongst themselves as to the nature of the elephant. And that is so much of what we do when we are in these inflexible positions of mind, where we can only see from one direction, from one perspective. The more and more we begin to loosen our grip on language, the more capacity there is in our experience for taking multiple perspectives and being able to see people, to engage with people on their terms, to meet people where they are, to not need to be right so much, to not be so righteous. And Dominique, I will go back to that conversation where you were saying, the escape mechanic. And it is absolutely true that most of us, we're uncomfortable being with ourselves. Because every time we're alone with ourselves, we start to encounter our own minds, and we don't know how to do it. We don't know how to have compassion for ourselves. We don't know how to offer ourselves loving attention. What we end up encountering instead is that voice, that conditioned voice, right? That voice from yesterday or from childhood that says you're not good enough, you're not getting it right. Why aren't you doing it this way? Why aren't you doing it that way? You're unworthy. You don't deserve it. That's the voice that so many of us end up encountering whenever we're alone with ourselves. And so rather than be alone with ourselves, we prefer to distract ourselves. And that we've been culturally conditioned to see distraction as natural and normal and appropriate. It's what everyone does. It's what everyone does. Yeah. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about over the course of the next 9 weeks is really about how to be fully present with ourselves, with all of the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, the sensations, and the experiences that arise and appear and dissolve within the awareness that we are. And the means and mechanisms by which we're going to play with this are indirect. They're indirect because we don't want to we're not trying to make awakening or enlightenment or psychological well-being or any of that. We're not trying to make it a goal. What we're trying to really bring ourselves to is the place where we recognize that we are already whole and complete right here and right now, no matter what's happening. And when we can be completely present with ourselves, no matter what's happening, and we can offer ourselves loving, tender care and kindness and compassion in the midst of even the most difficult of circumstances, then we are available, we are open and available to life in ways that most people aren't. And so it's a tremendous blessing, a tremendous gift to be able to work within ourselves to the point where we're just here. We're not trying to get anywhere anymore. We're not trying to get away from this moment. This moment's enough. This moment's always enough. And so the means by which we're going to be talking about this, they're indirect. They're indirect. So we're going to talk about, over the course of the next few weeks, right, we're going to talk about loving ourselves, trusting ourselves, and honoring our own journey. Because again, that voice, the way we've been conditioned, the things that have happened to us in the past, perhaps we encountered some sort of psychological trauma in our youth as a child. Perhaps we faced some sort of abandonment crisis in our early days. Perhaps we were in abusive relationships, either with a parental figure or with a love interest. Perhaps we underwent some sort of tragedy in our lives, things like war or rape or these absolutely horrendous things that can happen to us, have a tremendous psychological impact on us. Perhaps we were raised in a family that was unloving or very judgmental. So many different scenarios, right? It's limitless, the various number of scenarios. Each and every one of us have been on our own journey. And each and every one of us, we know what it's like to be in the world and surrounded by people and to see the various ways they interact with each other and the various ways they interact with us and the ways that people make demands of each other and have expectations of each other and are disappointed in each other and become angry with each other. So what we're going to be talking about is how to offer ourselves loving, tender care amidst the insanity and the chaos of what we're experiencing, and how to honor what's true for us, how to honor what feels right for us in our own experience. And another reason why this particular honoring is important is because in the same way that many of us are trying to avoid difficulty or challenges in our experience or painful memories, whatever it might be, a lot of us are also willing to abdicate responsibility for our own well-being, to abdicate it to an elected official or a spiritual teacher or a family member or someone in our life. And we would rather them tell us what to do than sort of take responsibility for our own lives and for our own well-being. And I encounter a lot of people who, you see and hear about people who end up finding themselves in cult environments, right? There's an abdication of sort of personal self-interest and personal responsibility in favor of the person who has all the answers. Right? The reality is, again, going back to our conversation about the limits of language, and we will talk about this quite a bit over the course of the next few weeks, but if you have an answer, well, then you've missed it. Because an answer is going to come in words. An answer is going to come in symbols. An answer is going to come in the context of meaning. And so whenever you encounter someone who presents themselves as having all the answers, I just have to smile inwardly and say, that's really interesting. I myself know nothing. I myself know nothing at all. And that's a beautiful place to be. So honoring our own journey is essential. Trusting ourselves, really, really beginning to trust in our experience of ourselves, trusting in our experience of life. And we're going to talk as well about mindfulness and meditation, some tools and techniques that we can use to engage in the process of inner inquiry, to cultivate mindfulness, to be able to take that step back from the mind and from the mental chatter and disentangle ourselves from the identification with it, you know? So then we can live our lives more fully and more freely. And when we're getting into conflict with ourselves or with others, we can then tap into a tool or a technique or a mechanism by which we can just take a moment to breathe and relax and remember what's more deeply true, if that's what we're called to in that moment. We're also going to talk about facing and letting go of our pain. This will be an interesting conversation, and that gets into some of the trials and the tribulations and the tragedies of our lives, and what we haven't yet encountered within ourselves, what we're not ready to encounter within ourselves. We're not going to push or force anybody into anything. That's not the purpose. But it's more about sort of laying the groundwork or establishing a framework by which we can begin that process, if we haven't already, to sort of really look at all the subtle ways that unworthiness has been embedded in us, and look at how can we undo that sense of unworthiness by doing really, really deep inner work, by bringing a degree of radical self-honesty to our experience of ourselves and our experience of our lives. Then we're going to talk, after that one, we're going to talk about synchronicity, which is really beautiful. You know, synchronicity is all those coincidences in life that aren't really coincidences. You know, going a little deeper, what I would say is, when you look beyond language, when you look beyond its limits, what you begin to realize is there is a non-separateness, right? That all borders and boundaries, the borders and boundaries that exist between me and between you, only exist because of the language that creates those borders and boundaries. The idea of me as being separate from you. If we look at science, and I don't really talk about metaphysics or anything like that. I like to focus on real science. If we focus on real science, right, everything's made out of atoms. Okay? Now we can say that it goes down into deeper constituent parts, but fundamentally, just for the sake of simplicity, everything's made out of atoms. The atoms that are here are the same as the atoms that are there. There's no difference. And the air, the space in between us, is filled with atoms of a different kind, but they're still atoms. They're the still same fundamental structure. Okay? And so here we are with our minds, and we're saying, oh, I am apart from you. I am separate from you. Yeah? But it isn't really true. The borders and boundaries are defined and established through the use of language and a belief in separateness. So when we begin to look beyond that belief in separateness, when we begin to really challenge that in ourselves and recognize that that is not fundamentally true, provably false, then we're left with this great mystery. But within the mystery, there's an understanding of ourself, of all of this as a unified whole. And when we experience synchronicities from that perspective, what we're really seeing is a prevailing underlying inherent perfection that exists in all aspects of life as it is, that's inarguable. And it's all those moments of synchronicity are sort of those moments where we're being invited to recognize that that's what's true. So we're going to spend a lot of time. Synchronicity is a really fun topic to play with. It'll be a good shift after we're done talking about facing and letting go of our pain. And then after that, we're going to talk about traps. And we're going to talk about all the various ways that we entrap ourselves. And as I said earlier, one of the biggest traps there is the trap of awakening, the trap of enlightenment. The idea that there's somewhere to go or something to get. And I'm reminded, I think it's Suzuki Roshi, and I have my own variation on it, but the Zen master Suzuki Roshi, he was quoted as saying, and again, this is my own variation on it, but quoted as saying something along the lines of, "You are perfect just as you are, but fat lot of good that does you if you don't know it." Right? And so traps, if we don't know it, we're entrapped in our not knowing in a different way. And this is really in that session we'll be talking a lot about the willingness that we have to encounter the mystery, the willingness that we have to live in the mystery. And that's really what this term mysticism in our modern day language and the way that it's used in spiritual circles, it's lost its meaning, it's lost its value. What it really means is mystery. It means dwelling in the mystery. And that's why I said, whenever we have any kind of answer, oh, well, this is what it is. Here's what I believe. Here's what I think. Here are the words that I'm going to use to create a descriptive mechanism that will help me feel safe and secure, as if I know. But if we can learn how to recognize the safety and the security that's present in the not knowing, in having trust in the way of life, as the Tao Te Ching explains, the nature of the Tao, the flow of nature itself. Okay? Can we have trust in that? Can we deepen into that? It's already true, so we might as well. So in the conversation around traps, we're going to discuss that. And then the last session, we're going to talk about the dance of fear and surrender. Because every time we start to challenge ourselves in the places where we lean on language and we lean on beliefs, and we're willing to look at how is it that how many rungs are on the ladder that I have climbed to arrive at this notion of how it is? And am I willing to look at each one of those rungs in turn and see if it's really true? And then get back down to that place where I don't know. And so the dance of fear and surrender is really about what happens psychologically to the mind as it goes through the process of relinquishing its attachment to the concepts, the ideas, the notions, and the beliefs that it is currently supporting itself on. It's on life support, essentially. It's on life support. And then we're going to, along the way, we're going to learn some things, discover some things, unlearn some things, realize what isn't true, realize perhaps what is true. And we're going to play, because that's really essential here. It's essential that we not get too caught up in the seriousness of it all, that we learn to laugh and have some sense of mirth. Because it's going to get challenging. Life gets challenging. The Buddha was quite clear. Life is suffering. This is the first of his Four Noble Truths. And this is true in many, many different. Christ was talking about take up your cross and follow me. The true mystics and sages with whom we are familiar, they had very difficult and very challenging lives, and somehow somehow they managed to find a deep inner reserve or resiliency that allowed them to encounter life with tremendous compassion and wisdom. And we are all capable of that. We all have that inherent capacity within ourselves. It's just about discovering. It's just about arriving at an understanding that it's here. But it's very difficult to recognize when we're trying to look at it through the vehicle of mind, through the lens of language, through our thoughts and ideas and beliefs, our interpretations. This is why Jesus spoke in parables, because when he was trying to explain, if you go and you look at some of the Gnostic Gospels, they're a lot more direct. You read the Gospel of Truth or the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of Mary. They're much more direct in many of the teachings that he provided. But he couldn't really speak in the way that he wanted to most people because they couldn't understand what he was saying, because they were hearing it all through the lens of mind. And so he started to use parables and stories as a way to sort of circumvent the mechanics of the mind, to present it with stories that it had to decipher, almost like riddles. If you look at Zen koans, for instance, a tool that's used in the Zen tradition, what's the sound of one hand clapping, for instance, right? What does a dog have Buddha nature? These are riddles that are meant to force the mind to relinquish its sort of dependency upon itself, so that we can diffuse our dependency on mind and begin to drop from the mind, from the thinking mind, down into the heart of our being. The mind will still be active. It's still a tool. We can still make use of language. We can still make use of thoughts and beliefs and all of those things. They still have an important pragmatic role in our experience of life, especially if we're going to occupy our life as it is right now. But we're doing so with the understanding, with a different kind of a seeing. We're doing so from the position of the heart, from the presence of our being. All right, so again, I'll just take a moment here and ask, how are you folks feeling about some of what I'm sharing at this point, and what are some of your thoughts or experiences in relation to any of what I'm sort of introducing in this first session? Good. And one of the other things I'll do is, over the course of this period, I'll also send out, there's a Facebook group that you've all been invited to participate in. It's in the emails that I sent out. Some of you, I think, are already part of it. But I'll start sending out additional links to other videos, teachers, things that you can explore on your own. If someone here is aligned with a particular religious or spiritual or philosophical system of belief, you can just let me know in the Facebook group, and I'll share resources that are very geared in that direction. I remember I had a coworker a while ago who was very interested. When I appear in my work environment, I am exactly who I am in this moment as well. And I'm a cybersecurity professional by trade in the IT discipline. And so when I show up in my life with this understanding, it can often catch people off guard. And they're like, well, wait a minute, you have a really interesting way of seeing things. I'm curious about that. And so we would have these really wonderful, deep dialogues about understanding, where it is that I was coming from, what I was sharing. And she would actually come to some of my teaching sessions. And at one point she told me, she goes, I'm deeply Catholic. I am hardcore Catholic. My family is hardcore Catholic. And I really want to understand, am I abandoning Catholicism if I'm interested in this stuff? And I was like, oh God, no. Let me give you a laundry list of Christian mystics and Catholic saints who you can read, and they're saying exactly what I'm saying. There's no need to fear this or to lose what it is that we're already connected with as part of the process. It's just about, if you have a context with which you're familiar and comfortable today, then let's shine a light on this this sort of hidden dimension of that context, you know, because if you go and you talk to, just somebody who was raised in I was raised in the Catholic faith. So if you go talk to somebody who just goes to church on Sunday and read the Bible and start asking them some very deep questions, they're going to respond a certain way. But if you go to a monastic, like let's say a Jesuit monastic priest, right? Or somebody who is part of a monastic order that dwells in silence, right? And then you start asking them the same deep questions, same religion, same system of same structure, but they're going to have very different answers to those questions because they've encountered they've encountered what those teachings are pointing towards. So, you know, you can go study Meister Eckhart or St. John of the Cross or St. Teresa of Avila, right? I mean, these are profound, deeply profound spiritual leaders. The same is true in Buddhism. The same is true in Judaism, right? Judaism has the whole Kabbalah or Kabbalah. And there are it's a rich treasure trove. Within the Islam, right? You have the Sufis who, you know, their whole world revolves around the mystical heart of love and what it really means to dwell in the heart, right? And within philosophy, right? You have the Stoics, the Stoic philosophers. Beautiful, beautiful, rich history of inner exploration and learning how to live from this a rich, fully embodied life. So it really doesn't matter, even if you're an atheist, it's like, look, you know, then let's come at this from a scientific perspective. Look, here are these scientific journals. These are not metaphysics. This is not stuff that somebody, you know, wants to try to shape a certain way to prove their point about some idea they may have about spirituality. No, these are scientists, you know, and they're very clear cut in their articulation of what they're discovering. So it doesn't really matter if we're coming at it from a New Age perspective, right? And we're talking about energy and metaphysics, and we can cut through all that and get right to the mystical heart of that too. It's everywhere. It's everywhere you look. It's everywhere you go. There isn't anywhere that this understanding isn't at the heart of. It's just that so few people are exposed to it. Because the vast majority of us are operating from the position of the conditioned mind. And we reinforce the positionality of the conditioned mind as we interact with each other. And in order to sort of be the disruptive influence within that chain of continuation, you have to discover something deeper within yourself that puts you in a position where you're willing to challenge that. You're willing to say, hey, you know, that's one way of looking at it. But did you know that there's another way you could look at it? There's another way you can see. And it doesn't look like you think it does. No, you become an ambassador of love. You become an ambassador of truth in your own life and in the lives of those that you encounter. Because you've seen for yourself. This is absolutely experiential. Everything I'm talking, this is absolutely experiential. It is something you discover in yourself. It's not, you don't take anybody's word for it. You know, that's why I spend a lot of time emphasizing this. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. I can show you where it is. I can show you where it is in the science. I can show you where it is in the historical, traditional writings of your religious philosophy, whatever it is. I can show you where it is. And you can go do the research. You can study it. You can look at it. You can find teachers that express what you're interested in, and you will see that it is absolute. There's a reason. I remember I used to go to this group of people who enjoyed Eckhart Tolle, and I would just go because there are very few spiritual groups in the area that even have these kinds of conversations. But the people in that particular group would say, you know, from time to time, they'd say, oh my God, I love Eckhart. He did such a good job. He studied all these religions and he figured out how to put them all together. And, you know, oh, it's really beautiful. I'm like, well, you know, that's the way it may seem. But perhaps what you're missing is the fact that the reason there's so much commonality among the teachers, not necessarily the religions that followed the teachers, but the teachers themselves. Perhaps one of the reasons there's so much commonality is because they've all discovered the same thing within themselves. There's a shared understanding. Right? Eckhart Tolle is one person who has tapped into that understanding. And when you tap into that understanding, you can connect the dots. It's very easy. It's very natural. It comes effortlessly. You know, so it doesn't matter whether it's physics or psychology or neuroscience or a spiritual or wisdom-based tradition. It's right there. It's right there, just waiting to be discovered. Well, I'll give you two answers. One is, I'll give you three answers. One is, my own understanding is the guiding light in my life, right? Because my experience is one of non-separateness. I don't have to turn to another in order to feel fulfilled or heard or understood. I don't have to, I don't find my sense of comfort in conversation or dialogue. I enjoy conversing and I enjoy dialogue. I prefer meaningful dialogue. I prefer to go to a level of depth. I'm very, very bad at surface level conversations, very bad at small talk. I just don't find it very satisfying or invigorating. But my sense of my own self as sort of as all of life, right? This is what we are. We are all of life. It's inseparable and indivisible, right? So because that understanding is fully present and fully embodied in my being, for me to come to you and to find a sense of connection and communion and to get a sense of fulfillment from you is, to me, it has a quality, it's illusory. I have learned to find that connection in the heart of my own being. And so I don't have a dependency per se in community. And I'm not saying it's like that for everyone. Many people still feel drawn to community. I feel drawn to community more because I enjoy sharing from this deeper place and inviting people to investigate for themselves, right? So that's one of the reasons I go into community. One of my other answers is I have my wonderful partner, Lisa, who lives in this understanding herself. She had her own very direct series of experiences. And we sit here together, and she's also a graduate student in a mental health counseling program. We are both completely dedicated to living and sharing this truth of what's been discovered in our experience of ourselves. She spends time she has a couple of teachers and mentors in her life that have been very profoundly influential. But ultimately, her own experience has been, you know, this absolutely amazing, profound self-discovery. And so we just sit here and have these wonderful dialogues, you know, where we inhabit both the presence of awareness that we are and our experience of separateness and being as we are. And we hold both. And it's a beautiful way of sharing. She said, you're smiling at me right now. And then third, I do engage in different environments and settings and communities. Again, I'm more drawn to it because I like to share. But I find that when I do connect with people and I do encounter people who are open to these kinds of dialogues, there's a very immediate sense of resonance. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, I find that most people are either curious, it's like I'm non-dual curious, right? Or they're flirting with it. They're like, you know, I've had a taste of some of this for myself. I've had these insights and these experiences that I can't really explain. And what you're saying and talking about sort of sounds like it. So I'm interested in learning a little bit more to see if I can make sense of it. Other people, they've had some very deep and profound glimpses or awakening experiences or moments of insight where they're like, yeah, I get it. I may not get it all the way or whatever, but I get it. And I'm on board. And then there are people who are just sort of floating around going, yep, it's all good. And so I generally tend to go into communities where people are in those one of those frames of mind, right? I don't go into a lot of spiritual communities, because most spiritual communities, there's a foundation of spiritual belief that everybody's agreeing to, and everybody's supporting with each other and reinforcing with each other, right? And it's sort of like, you know, if I go into a group, for instance, and again, I'm not trying to challenge anybody directly here, but when I go into a group and everybody says, oh, everything is energy, and I say, oh, that's an interesting perspective, right? Everything is energy. Well, what is energy? What does that mean? What is that, you know, is that a thing, or is that just a pointer? Is energy the same to you as consciousness? Is energy the same to you as presence? Is energy the same to you as God? Or is energy a thing that's separate and apart and distinct and has a particular meaning and and then they go, oh yeah, no, energy, everything's energy. It's about what frequency you're vibrating at, right? It's about, you know, whether you attract good energy or you project bad energy. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So now we have good and bad. Oh, okay. So what is good and bad? Where does that come from? And who decides? What level of judgment is present in defining good and bad? What level of judgment is used to define right and wrong? You know, and are there perhaps cultural variations on these themes? And if they're cultural variations, then are they objective or subjective? And if they're subjective, can they be true? And so is your system of belief, where everything is energy and things vibrate at frequencies, and there are good frequencies and bad frequencies, higher frequencies and lower frequencies, can any of that be true if it's all subjective? Can you objectively prove to me, through my direct experience, that any of what you just said is actually true? And so I have difficulty going into various spiritual communities, because I'm always, where I live and what I see and the conversations I have with other teachers who work in the same way that I do, we absolutely live in a mystery. We absolutely, without question, we live in the mystery of being. We use language as a way of communicating and sharing, but our direct experience is a mystery. And we all laugh whenever we hear this idea of, oh, it's all this, or it's all that. It's like, oh, is that true? Because now you have an answer. And if you have an answer, that answer is present in the mechanics of language. But all words are made up. And if you haven't seen that for yourself, if you haven't fully acknowledged that all words are made up, then you're still fooling yourself. You're still living in a state of delusion. Right? And this isn't a judgment. Again, I'm not trying to challenge anybody directly. We're very early in this process. But I think based on what I'm describing, again, you know, the foundations of what I'm talking about, they're very well established. And I think logically we can see, right? Just the conversation about the chair, how self-limiting language systems really are. And the fact that, who said it was a chair? And doesn't chair have a different word in about 1,000 different languages? Okay. So again, it's not objective. It's not objective truth to point at a particular object and call it a chair. I don't know very many other languages at all, so I can't tell you what other ways we might define a chair or call a chair a chair. But these are things that, like, you know, logically we can evaluate. You know, you can bring your full intelligence, your full intelligence to this process of investigation. This is also referred to as jhana yoga, or the yoga of mind, where we sharpen the mind until we're able to pierce the mind. You know, we bring a degree of radical self-honesty to the investigation of mind, and then we go, man, I don't know anything. I don't know anything. And then you're open. Then you're free. I don't know anything. It's true freedom.
Thank you.
So, yeah. So again, let me look at the time here. Okay. I want to take some time now to just open it up to a little bit more dialogue, and give you folks maybe an opportunity to share, again, based on the things that I'm talking about, what I'm describing. You know, if you have questions or something very specific that might be of interest to you, or something that you'd like to explore in the time that we have this evening, I just want to open it up.
I'm experiencing this and there's something magical happening in the conversation in my awareness that I know what that is, but I can't put it into words now.
That's exactly beautiful.
So my next thing that I'm coming to is like this question of when to speak. You know, just when to speak, when to allow words to become the creation of the next thing. You know what I mean? In the sense of like when you start seeing that there's so much in the word, there's so much existence that comes the minute you put it out, depending on tone, and you know, so much. So silence is great. But then learning to sit in that silence, you know, and then the non-connectivity, like you were saying, you're able to be connected within yourself to yourself, and then go from there. Okay.
Yes.
There's still the mirroring aspect of defining myself through. So I can see that as the level of work that I need to do. And then I'll stop there so others can share. You get to see kind of like the level of work that I've been doing in 3.5 years with Brad, and that, for example, anxiety, depressions, and a lot of the things that I was attached to have passed. But a lot of the things that are just part of me, I'm picking them back up in order to just start figure out, you know? So it's a shedding process.
Rudy again, like Rudy was saying, we've been hanging out together for 3 or 4 years now. But Rudy's got an interesting background because he's also a Buddhist monk and a licensed clinical social worker. And so he has a tremendous breadth and depth of knowledge relating to the mind, right? And yet Rudy is a really wonderful example of how, you know, the mind is such an interesting character, you know? And it's always sort of pulling us in this direction or pulling us in that direction, or telling us that we're not getting it, or telling us that we're not there, you know? And this is so true for all of us.
Is there a wholesome level of telling that the mind does? I mean, I know that where we go into the wholesome, unwholesome, so we create a duality right there. I just caught it, right?
Yeah, so let's
in the sense of, since we do entertain thoughts.
Yes. So let's bring it, you know, this is something we'll encounter a little bit further down the road, but just to set the tone here, right? So ultimately, what non-duality demonstrates in our own direct experience is this non-separateness, is that there are no borders, there are no boundaries, there's no manner or capacity for differentiation, right? And in that place, what we see is there is an aliveness, an intelligent aliveness, a loving, intelligent aliveness to life. And that all of life is a manifestation of that loving intelligence, right? And even those moments where we're confronted by, should I use words or should I not use words? Even in those moments, that intelligent aliveness is manifesting itself in that expression. And because we are always that, and we are never not that, we can never possibly get it wrong. You know, we just allow life to live itself through us. And as the veil of separateness begins to fall away, and we really acknowledge and understand and recognize the inherent interconnectivity, the essential underlying essence that is the nature of life, that is what we all are, inseparable, right? Then we just meet everyone and everything with a greater degree of love and openness and honesty and acceptance and willingness. It just naturally exudes from our being, right? Because we're no longer living in a place where the mind is getting into the differentiation. The mind is no longer getting caught up in its systems of belief. It's no longer getting lost in the ocean of separateness. It's just here. It's part of the whole expression. Another way I could say this is, you know, I like to say that when I'm speaking with somebody who has a Christian orientation, a faith-based orientation, and they'll sit here and I'll say, well, you know, the Bible says that God is omnipresent. Is that not correct? And they'll say, yes, yes, God is omnipresent. I'm like, so that means God is everywhere all at once, right? Oh, yes, 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 that's omnipresent. And I say, okay, so does that mean God isn't in you? Does that mean God isn't you right now? And then they go, oh, yes, no, not in me. I'm getting it wrong. And it's like, well, that right there, how could you say that God is omnipresent everywhere all at once and yet not in you? Right? So there are various mechanics, various ways that we can challenge the belief systems that we've cultivated within our experience of ourselves that say, no, not me. I'm apart from it all. I'm separate from it all. I'm the one who can get it wrong. I have an ego and I have to squash this ego, right? But even the ego, right? So, okay, so there's this thing called ego. All right, that's very interesting. We use this word a lot within psychology and within a variety of spiritual traditions. And yet, if we go into something like Advaita Vedanta, right, where the great saints and sages would say, you are that. This is all there is. Everything is this. And then you go, yes, I agree with you, but this ego. In that moment, we're using language to create distance and separateness. We're taking ourselves out of the whole, and we're setting ourselves up in a way so that in our separateness, we can celebrate our unworthiness. Yeah. And that is a tragedy. So by peering beyond the veil of the belief in separateness, and there's a recognition, an experiential recognition of our wholeness. In the way that the Buddha once was talking about, you know, a flower is not just a flower, right? There are no flower elements to be found in a flower. The flower is actually the sun. It's the wind. It's the soil. It's the rain. The flower doesn't exist. Only these parts, these elements, these pieces coming together create the flower. And in the same way, each and every one of us is created in the same way. There's no separate self, no independent entity that we can hold on to and call me. It's in doing so that we create that sense of separateness.
But it's a beautiful way to just see the process of that. It is waking up is a process. It's not and it's not it's not even a doing. It's happening right now as we're speaking in our silence, as new ideas are getting questioned and being shared. Get it? New confusions, you know, new internal battles to just like great, because as long as they're there, they're there.
That's why we're going to be going through this process over the next 9 weeks or next 8 weeks in a non-direct manner, right? Because we don't want to get confrontational with this inquiry, with this investigation. What we want to do is approach it with an openness, with a willingness, right? And use, as you were just saying, Rudy, you know, we show up and we listen to a talk, or we engage with a teacher, or whatever it might be. And we hear one thing, just one thing, and we go, I never thought about it that way before. And something clicks, right? And then we go for a week, right? And we find somehow that one thing keeps showing up again and again in some way to reinforce itself. And then we come to the next one and we're like, okay, I'm ready to get into this now because I'm seeing it reflected in my own life. I'm seeing, you know, synchronicity. Again, we'll talk about that in a certain segment, but synchronicity, its presence in our lives begins to really draw us into this absolute willingness to encounter the truth, no matter what the truth may be. We become like those detectives on the TV shows, right? You know, it's like, I'm going to follow the truth no matter where it leads, right? Philosophy itself is a love of truth, a love of truth. And ultimately, the truth of what we discover about ourselves is this mystery, right? I am this aware presence. even using that language, right, is a way of trying to point to it with words and with language. But even when I do that, I am aware of the pointing. This aware presence, am aware of this attempt to try to define myself, right? And I can see that happening.
Brad, the difficult part seems to be like when, as I'm speaking to you, I'm there in that place where, oh, the knowing, totally get it. And then the knowing that the next thing is just going to be a mystery of what erupts, you know? And the fact that in this moment I can be here, and then the next thing is start thinking about politics, let's say, or start thinking out how far away in the world
Sure.
we really are, in the sense of like here.
Yeah.
And so
but we're here even in that. We're here even in that.
So, but is it something, I said, something that we bring upon through consciousness, and where's the choice in that? Where does that choice come in that? If it's here now, why isn't it here now?
Let's go ahead and table that for right now.
Okay.
And leave that, because it gets into some things that are a little more challenging, right? You know,
Okay.
is there choice present for an entity that does not exist? Right? It becomes an interesting existential question, right?
Yeah. The illusion of it is a pretty heavy one, though.
Yeah, but see, that's what I'm saying, though, is some of these things, if we try to get into that level of depth right now, it's going to be confusing, right? These are, you know, after we're 2 or 3 or 4 sessions down the road and people have had an opportunity to sort of play with some of these things themselves, and it's not such an assault, right? You know, when we enter into these dialogues, some of the deeper stuff can feel like an assault, like, oh my God, I don't want to handle, I'm not interested in this.
Don't get scared. It's a process.
But we still play an active role in our lives. You know, the most awakened, enlightened beings are not, you know, they're not passive. You know, Gandhi was not passive, right? You know, I mean, he was a pacifist, but he was active in the way that he engaged the world and challenged the world, right? Challenge the issues of social justice. But yeah, let's table that. And I want to give other folks an opportunity, because we are sort of running down on time, and I do want to make sure that I give folks an opportunity if there's anything in particular that anyone wants to bring up or discuss. Okay. Well, again, what I will say is that, you know, we've got the private Facebook group that's out there. And I would love if any of you have any, you know, a particular area of challenge. Like I said, you know, if we're Christian and we're like, I don't know, or if we're have a new age philosophy, we're like, I'm not sure. If we're an atheist and we're like, just you know, speak up in the group, and I'll be happy to share some resources to sort of point you in the direction of those things that you can start to look at on your own terms, in your own way, and use as a diving board, right, into other areas of investigation, so that you can really feel like this is something that you're doing on your terms, that you are in control of this process of inner investigation at this point in time in your journey. It's very important to feel safe and secure in the work that we're doing, especially in the early stages, right? Very important to feel safe and secure in the work that we're doing. Eventually, it's going to be you challenging yourself to move beyond that safety net, right? But that has to happen on your terms. And so I just want to sort of enable this process and facilitate this process and help point you in the direction of those things that will help you come at this on your terms. Because some of it can be pretty challenging stuff. Anything else? I'll give one last opportunity. The other thing that I would say is, as part of this series, I had offered doing individual sessions with people. A couple of you have taken me up on that. And I would encourage, if some of this is, if it's just curious, it's just, hey, I'm curious. I want to learn more about this, or I have some concerns, or, here's my history, and, I really want to talk about some of this stuff. Please, by all means, go ahead and take advantage of it. Go ahead and schedule a private session for us to sit and chat a little bit. This is a heart-to-heart connection. This is an opportunity for us to just sit together and talk about where you're at and how you're feeling about it, and what you're hoping to get out of this experience or out of this process, so that we can really engage together to make sure that that's happening. So there's this session here at the beginning that was offered when we're talking about facing and letting go of our pain. We're going to do another private session after that, and then at the end we'll do one. What did you take away from this? What did you find most interesting? How was your, it does, maybe nothing happens for you. I really don't know how any of this is going to work for anyone in this group. But most people have some significant insight or some level of perceptual change, or may leave with a different sense of openness. It just varies from person to person. There's no right or wrong. There's just, this is what it is for me. This is what I was meant to take away from this, So you come and we spend time together, and you bring your openness and your willingness, and that's a beautiful thing. And we engage, and you take what's meant for you and you leave the rest behind. Nobody's here saying, here, you got to believe this, here, you've got to take this, you have to do it this way. If you ever hear any sort of spiritual teacher talking in that way, turn around and walk in the other direction. Some things are going to be very challenging, but it has to be on your terms. It has to be meeting you where you are. And the best way to do that is in this sort of one-on-one, just talking a little bit about what that is for you, what spirituality, what your psychology, what your definition of well-being is, those kinds of things. Just want to encourage everybody, take advantage of those opportunities if you feel called to do so. And with that, it's 9:35, so I want to give everybody back to return everyone to their lives. And I just want to thank you all so much for taking the time and having the willingness to come and take this hour and a half out of your day and just sit and talk. And next week, we're going to talk about what it means to love yourself, trust yourself, and honor your own journey. And we're going to get into some of those hard topics about unworthiness and self-love and self-care, and how to really take care of ourselves amidst the wacky, wild journey that we're on. So thank you everyone so much for your time.